Hello ballers, what's going on? It's Breacher, and just 12 hours after I released the intro to Endgame of Legion that we know so far, we managed to get a good sit-down interview with Ion, the lead game designer, who went into far more detail on the challenge mode stuff than we got out of BlizzCon. So, it's important we look at this. This is where I'm actually going to focus a hell of a lot of my scrutiny. This and class design is probably going to be my main focus for the Legion pre-content. And unfortunately, I can't bring you any footage because none really exists at this point. I don't have access to the game, but I will get that to you as soon as possible. So I apologize for the little slideshowy stuff, but we're covering a lot of topics here and asking a lot of questions. So I think it's important. The reason I'm going to give this a hell of a lot of scrutiny is whether you realize it or not, the new challenge mode dungeon system is actually going to encompass a huge amount of separate entities that exist in Warlords of Draenor, and it's going to merge them all into there. And their intention is absolutely that this system will have the longevity to last from day one all the way up until the next expansion. It will encompass all of that. So that being said, it's going to be the main source of gearing up, especially early game for raiders. You're going to be in the challenge modes a hell of a lot, getting as many of these loot chests as possible in order to acquire the best gear possible for stepping foot into your first raid. It's going to be the replacement for the garrison cache. Okay, so no longer are you sending followers around and just getting whatever comes out at the end of it. You will actually be entering the challenge mode in order to initiate the jackpot system, as they're calling it, which will be a weekly chest there, or weekly, so it's said, but I'll talk about that in a sec, that arrives in your mailbox or whatever for your best performance. Right, that's going to encompass it as well. It's going to encompass the catch-up system. So, no doubt, every time a new raid tier is released, the loot and item level quality within the challenge mode system will increase, which means that the longevity is continued on throughout the game. It's also going to be the main source of gearing, not only for raiders in early game, but for probably everybody else in terms of consistency throughout the entirety of the game, okay? So they've said that raiding will be the most consistent, not necessarily the best anymore. I think we have to take that point there, is not necessarily the best, although in most cases it will be, nearly all cases it will be, it's from raiding. Raiding will be the most consistent. You will just get a lot of loot through raiding, which is fine. Then the next most consistent system will be the challenge mode system. And the worst source, or the most inefficient and less consistent source, will be world stuff. Okay, so that's how the system is going to work. So if you're not a raider and you choose to play with a small group of friends, this system should be absolutely on top of your priority list in terms of interest for Legion. As such, I think it's really important that we spend some time looking at it and hopefully as a community bashing out any potential problems that might occur from this system and really giving it the big dirty evil eye, right? Casting our big fucking Sauron all over this motherfucker, because if it goes wrong, this could be a disaster. And I don't think I expressed the point yesterday in yesterday's video, is that I'm really excited for this system, but it's important that we look at potential pitfalls. So far, it looks really good, but let's look at the potential pitfalls and hopefully iron those out. Help iron those out. No doubt the lead game designers are way ahead of us on the curve, but maybe sometimes on occasion, as we have seen, some of our ideas do tend to pop up in the game, and that's important for us. Okay, so let's start off with something that is conspicuous by its absence on the MMO Champion Cliff Notes of the interview. I truly suggest you actually watch it. It's only about a 2-minute section of the entire video. Is that this system is absolutely not finalized. It's not finalized at all, okay? This is still way into development, and anything we talk about now can be changed. That is, in fact, the whole point of these kind of discussions, is these things can change. So please, for the love of God, don't be someone who interprets something one way, and that's the fact in your head. It's going to change. They're being a little bit vague about some things, and some of the more obvious things, which tends to happen. I suffer from this a lot. Something I consider to be an obvious implication isn't picked up because they never specifically said it. Right? So that always happens. So such things as there is no item level scaling in challenge modes anymore. So that's something that wasn't said specifically, but the fact of the matter is you're there to get gear now. You're getting gear out of the challenge modes, and that gear will then help you to do the dungeons later. So that's important to know. There's no challenge mode, or at least from everything I'm being told, there is none, but it's not been set in stone yet. Perhaps there is, and they're talking more about skill level and experience. Entirely possible. But you have to believe that as this is going to encompass the catch-up system, that, yeah, gear doesn't scale or anything like that. You're not going to be scaled back to blues or any of this nonsense. That's not going to happen. The better gear you've got, the better it's going to be for you, or the easier it's going to be for you. So those kind of things are something that's important. Your keystone is locked to a dungeon. I didn't mention this yesterday because, again, stupidly, I thought it was kind of obvious. Your keystone is locked to a dungeon. So you'll get, if I put it in today's terms, you'll get like a Skyreach keystone, right? Which works only in Skyreach, allows you to start the Skyreach challenge mode, doesn't work in any other dungeon, okay? You will get very easily, or if by proxy, 1 keystone per week. There's a chance of getting bonus ones, which will be for different dungeons, no doubt, or maybe not. We don't know yet, but you'll be able to definitely quite easily get 1 keystone per week. Now, obviously, bearing in mind those are dungeon locked, that could be... You could end up with a thing where most people get the keystone for 1 dungeon, or hopefully it's going to be varied around so you can pick and choose. But that keystone is certainly tied to the player. So if you get a Skyreach keystone, you can only initiate the Skyreach challenge mode, whereas somebody else can get a different keystone and start the challenge mode in a different dungeon. So I hope that system makes sense for you. Alright, so that's generally how the system's going to work. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of how the system will work, because we've got some clarifications on the things we talked about yesterday. Firstly, if you complete the objectives when you go in, challenge modes have objectives. You start them with a keystone, you'll get an objective which starts with time. You will get a loot reward and an upgraded keystone in order to go into the next dungeon. Now, they're calling these tiers, so we'll use that term going forward. So your tier 1 challenge mode will be a timed objective. You beat that, you'll get the loot, and you'll get the tier 2 keystone. You will then go into the tier 2 dungeon. Now, if you fail your tier 2 run, which will be time plus something else, you will still get loot for finishing the dungeon. But you won't get the upgraded keystone, you will get a depleted keystone. It won't be destroyed, as I said yesterday. You will get a depleted keystone. So it still exists. If you then do the depleted keystone run, the depleted keystone will allow you to redo the dungeon you just failed, and you beat the objectives. You won't get loot, but you will then get an upgraded keystone to start the next tier. So, to put it in more simple terms as well, for anybody who's not quite following, if you do tier 1 and win, you will get a tier 2 keystone plus the loot from tier 1. If you go into tier 2 and fail, you will get the tier 2 loot, but you won't get the tier 3 keystone. You can try again with your tier 2 keystone. If you win and beat the objectives, you will get no loot, but you will get the tier 3 keystone. So I hope that makes perfect sense to everybody. That's how it's going to work. So let's start asking some fucking questions here, because when systems are unfinished, it is undoubtedly that it causes more questions than it can possibly imagine. So let's start bashing out some potential pitfalls in the questions. Firstly, how many attempts do you get with a depleted keystone? The comment Ion makes is that if they wanted to avoid a situation where if your tank or someone DCs, then that's ruined your progression in the challenge modes for that week. Right? Something unexpected happens, the server crashes, somebody disconnects, and it's like, GG, we failed, we can't go any further now, we can just get the loot from here, and we were doing really well. In fact, this was one of the earlier tier modes, and we're expected to go to tier 10 or whatever it might be. So that's why they're giving you the depleted keystone. So if something unexpected or something disastrous happens that was out of your control, you can absolutely try again. So the obvious question is, how many attempts do we get with that? This has to have a limit on it, otherwise people will spend all day in there. And Ion said, we don't want people just running the same dungeon over and over and over and over and over again. They want to limit this because players are victims of themselves. Absolutely. Players are victims of themselves. If there is loot to be had and people are going full try-hard mode, they will sit all day with a depleted keystone bashing their heads against something, which ultimately becomes tedious, frustrating, and not fun by any means, and that will happen very, very quickly. Just trying to beat the objectives, because then we'll get a fresh keystone and we can go a little bit further. So I would hope this is one. I hope this is one. That means you've had a 2 total amounts of tries against a specific tier of the challenge mode, and after that, hopefully the keystone is destroyed, or something happens with the keystone where it can no longer be used. It has 1 charge as a depleted keystone, so you can't do that. That would make total sense to me. So if you do manage to go, oh, we screwed up, but we can absolutely do this, you try it again on your next go, you pass and you can continue as normal, but you cannot just sit in there all day trying to force a way through in order to just simply get the next keystone and then start the whole cycle again. The burnout and the anger and bitterness of that would be absolutely incredibly nightmarish, and that should be wished on no one. So the next question I put on that is, do keystones reset or can we preserve them? Now this ties into the fact that this replaces the garrison cache. The garrison cache, or the jackpot as it's called, is tied to your best performance of the week. So that will no doubt be based on how high you manage to get in terms of the tier runs. Now ultimately you will fail. Right? That's the system. You will fail. It would just become so hard that you can't pass. However, next week, we will probably have, let's say you're a raider or anybody else in the world, you will have more gear. You will have an increased amount of item level. You'll have more experience, all this kind of good stuff, which means you should be able to progress further. Do we have to do all of the easier ones again each week? The answer, I hope, is no. I really hope that's no. Because ultimately, this system is designed to only be worth for the jackpots for certain amounts of people. The stuff you will actually get in there won't be as good as the good stuff that you can get for the jackpot, which is personalized to you. So what I would absolutely hope is that, okay, this is where we've gone for this week, but I want to preserve this item till next week. But undoubtedly, there are also the same people there who want to start again and collect more loot, because you'll have the choice of more chests as you work through, right? You'll have the choice, as you do tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, you'll be getting loot chests all the way up, which in early game is going to be very important. Every upgrade is an upgrade. But ultimately, this system will convert from that process of collecting as much loot as possible, regardless of quality, into I just want to do my one run per week to get my jackpot. And that's it. Now, that system will obviously ultimately crescendo with a point where you can't do that dungeon once per week because you've reached a tier level that's just too high, and then you can move into different challenge modes, or in fact just allow your keystone to reset and spend 1 week at some point just getting back up to a reasonable tier level to get the jackpot that you think you deserve, or of an item level or quality that you think you actually want from your jackpot. So really hope there's a system in place where we can either preserve the keystone, drag it into next week, and then just do one run per week in order to activate the jackpot, or that we have just choice. That's all I'm saying. I just want choice. If it's going to automatically reset, then that would suck, because each week on week, you're going to have to start from square zero again. If we take the idea that there's 10 dungeons, right, and an average or decent level to be getting to for a raider in the beginning of the game is about tier 10, pulling numbers out of my arse here, but you get the idea, then that's potentially 100 dungeons, right, that you're potentially going to ask people to do on a week-by-week basis. That's absurd. So there must be a system, but we would love confirmation of a system like that. Next question I had is, are we loot locked based on tier level or not? Again, this is about protecting players from themselves. And some of you will probably be angry with that because you want to get as much as possible. I get that, but we're talking long-term here. We're talking long-term. And sometimes players do need protecting from themselves because they will just spend all day gathering as much loot as possible. If I reach tier 10 in Skyreach, do I still get loot from going to any other dungeon and being like tier 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9? Or not? That's an interesting question. Now, it has a couple of pitfalls. One, there's way less loot, right? There's obviously way less loot because you'll be focusing on one challenge mode, and whichever challenge mode is easier, which there always will be, that will be the only one that gets done. And those keystones, every other keystone will be considered trash in comparison, which nobody wants. We want to have a choice. But at the same time, do you want to give people the opportunity to run 10 dungeons worth of challenge modes once they have a reasonable amount of keystones, or just simply picking and kicking people from the group? I imagine this system is designed in order to create little groups of people, like small raid groups, who play together all the time. What you don't want to have is a system where, oh, our healer's used his keystone or has a shitty dungeon keystone, so we're going to get rid of him and bring in somebody else, and that's not very nice. There are huge pitfalls possible. It's either going to create a system where there is just far too many dungeons to be getting done, and you will feel, regardless of what anybody else ever says, like, you don't have to do it, you will feel like you need to run all the challenge modes all the time while you do the early gearing up, which even if that only lasts 3 weeks, that's a horrendous amount of dungeon grinding to be done. Horrendous amount. Far more than you probably do if you were just gearing in blues from heroic dungeons, right? Because this is a stage that comes after that process. Is something that you need to bear in mind there. So, interesting. And there are item level limits, but are there chest limits? Again, going into protecting players from themselves. So every time you finish the dungeon, you will get a chest with rewards in it, which no doubt has loot in it, and possibly some other stuff. We've not had any definition on that, and we haven't seen any actually drop. There are item level limits, obviously. You can't start getting really, really cheese groups for challenge modes and continuously get upgraded item levels. That would be ludicrous, because you would be like, you could potentially go way and above and beyond mythic raiding at that point, and they're comparing it to basically how mythic dungeons are now at the higher levels, so you get an idea of what kind of loot will probably drop in there. Are there chest limits? Can we go infinitely? Can we just keep going and going and going? Once we reach a point where we're severely overgeared and got a pretty cheesy group, is there a point where it just stops dropping loot and it's purely for prestige? Ion said that they will have leaderboards and such, which are for pure prestige purposes, and there will be a point where the item level just isn't relevant to you, right? That's okay, and that's when you turn it over to being more jackpot based than actually gear farming in there. Can we get a sort of specific point where, let's say at tier 15, for example, at tier 15, the dungeon just flat out doesn't give you loot anymore. It just gives you the next keystone. It's inferred that that might be the case, but we certainly haven't had that in writing. Or will we always get a chest? Every time we manage to finish a dungeon, will we always get a chest? Is there a point... Let's ask some more questions. Is there a point where we simply don't get more loot, but the chest rewards something else? Crafting materials, anything else? They have said that you will get artifact skins, or probably will get artifact skins from going deeper and above and beyond the Call of Duty inside the challenge modes. But I would love that loot certainly stops dropping as a natural stopping point. Yeah, loot simply is no longer a thing, and for those people who want to be competitive and push for leaderboards and stuff, they have all those choices there, and they can go and do that. But loot, which is the main driving force of, or will be, for a lot of people early in this process, they don't have that. That will actually come to a natural stopping point where you're done for the week, you're absolutely done with this content, you don't need to start grinding the same dungeon over and over and over and over again just to keep trying to get more loot, or in fact just getting more loot because you outgear it. And you could smash through it relatively easily. Up until a point, obviously, these things are designed to naturally kill you at some point. But you get the idea. Are we just going to get loot on loot on loot on loot on loot? And I imagine a lot of people on the face of it would be like, no, that seems really good to me, as I just keep getting more and more loot. Well, that's only fine in the extreme short term. Long term, that system is horrible. Absolutely horrible. And I don't want to be a part of it. I don't want it to exist like that. I personally have no trouble or no qualms about gearing up in the challenge mode system, especially as raids are usually delayed, spending my time on my main character, doing that through various dungeons, learning the challenge modes, learning the hopefully interesting mechanics as we go through there. But at some point, a natural stopping point is always worthwhile, rather than just, well, I don't care, let me put it in this context, I don't care about the competitive side, I don't want my name on a leaderboard for challenge modes, it's not why I'm doing them, but I kind of feel compelled to, because I'm just going to keep getting stuff. And the more stuff I get, especially as it goes up to a near mythic level, if I could do this in the early weeks, right? If I could do this in the early weeks because I have a particularly skilled team that doesn't require huge item levels to beat content, then how does that come to its natural end? And a natural ending point is something that people notice. It's a very difficult balance to achieve, as a kind of balance on, yes, you put the effort in, but now there's a nice time to stop and you don't feel like you're being shafted as a result. So limitations are required for this system, I think. I think that's the final thought so far, and I'm really hoping we get more details that I can go balls deep into. Alright guys, thank you so much for listening. Let me see your thoughts. Do you want just an endless possibility of grinding? Maybe? I don't know. Alright, bye-bye.